Get cozy and drift off to sleep as we dive into 2 hours of unsettling true stories from Reddit. These chilling tales are perfect for those who love a little thrill before bedtime. Let the eerie ambiance guide you into a night of strange dreams and deep sleep. Sweet nightmares. I work security at Disney World. Well, I did. I work in security at Disney World, the happiest place on Earth. Typically, I wouldn't say where I work, as obviously there are some pretty strict rules about things employees can put online, but I just don't think I can tell this properly without that context. And honestly, I think this may be it for me anyway with this job. I just can't see myself working here any longer now. I've been with the company for 23 years. The first 20 years I worked in the parks, nabbing shoplifters and rounding up people who were drinking too much for the heat. Occasionally there'd be a fight to break up, but people usually kept it pretty mild. The heat and walking was getting too much for me the last few years, so I asked to be transferred somewhere with AC, and the company moved me to one of their resorts. While the working conditions were 110% better as far as climate and comfort go, the guest issues were trickier, mainly domestics. I guess the expensive and stress of vacation got to a lot of people, and I'd be called by neighboring rooms because some mom and dad were yelling at each other. I'd try to suggest they take a nap or go do separate activities for a bit, and that would usually calm them down. But none of that is what I'm here for. I've got to get this out while I have time. 3 days ago, I got a call from management. Apparently, a couple of days before that, housekeeping had went into a room that should have been turned over that day. Turned over is when one guest leaves by about 11 a.m. and the next guest checks in around 3 p.m. And all of the guests' items were still in the room. Housekeeping made a note of it and moved on. But during the next 2 days when they entered the room, everything was still there and untouched. I went to check it out, and sure enough, there was an empty room full of luggage, clothes, snacks, some toys, everything a family would need for a vacation. The manager had already looked up the previous reservation, and it was for a family. Dad, mom, 2 little kids. I tried to call the phone numbers they had given, but all I got was voicemail. We were a bit stumped, so I made the call that housekeeper could clean the room and take the family's personal items to be held until we got in contact with someone. I went digging into the reservation more. The family had arrived 5 days before housekeeping discovered all of their stuff. I found that the family had paid a parking fee and their vehicle description was listed. A quick walk of the parking lots and I had easily located their vehicle. So that ruled out a car accident or them deciding to just leave all their stuff behind. Next, I saw that they had bought a dining plan. This is when a guest prepays for all of their food. They're given a certain number of credits to use for meals. This family had only used 3 credits, and the last one was 2 days after they checked in. It appeared that the day they arrived, they got here late and probably just stayed on the resort. The next day, they used 2 credits at Epcot. The second park day, they used just 1 credit at Magic Kingdom, and it was at breakfast time. Now at Disney, we have something called Magic Bands. Magic Bands are worn by the guests and act as a room key, park ticket, credit card, dining reservation payment, Fast Pass, a system used to bypass lines, and more. It took some work, but I was finally able to look up this family's Fast Pass history. The day they went to Magic Kingdom, they had breakfast at a restaurant in the park, rode a couple of rides, and then rode their last ride, It's a Small World, around 11 a.m. Then nothing. Finally, it was time to bring in someone else on this. I called an old coworker at Magic Kingdom and asked him to pull security footage for It's a Small World. At the time they wrote it, and I made my way over there. When I got there, my friend was very confused, almost distraught, looking. He showed me what he found. There's usually a camera in the direction of where rides load and unload. The footage showed them scanning their bands to use fast passes for the ride and boarding the ride. The footage from the exit of the ride just showed the other people in their car exiting. They weren't there. Of course, we thought the worst. Maybe one of the kids had fallen out and mom and dad and the other kid got off in the middle of the ride to help, and they all got injured or killed or stuck in machinery somewhere. So we shut down the ride. Middle of the damn day. turned off that earworm music, and turned up the lights. Me and my buddy walked that ride 3 times before we called in help. Eventually, there was close to 10 cast members searching, and we didn't find shit except for 3 cell phones and a hat. I was right stumped. I've kept digging the past couple of days, and I'm not sure who to tell what I found next to. I've called the police, and I suppose they're on the way, but the company has a way of covering up things like this, and I decided I can't live with myself if I don't put out some type of warning. I kept digging into their reservation over the last couple of days, and today I noticed they had purchased Memory Maker. There are photographers all over the parks and cameras in a lot of the rides, and with Memory Maker, the photos are all free. They automatically get added to a guest's Disney account when the system knows their picture has been taken. And the system always knows. Everyone's whereabouts are always known with the magic bands. Well, I opened up their Memory Maker photo album, and I swear there's 732 pictures. The first 30 or so are pretty normal. Epcot, a few rides, in front of the castle. But the rest are all in It's a Small World. The rides only take 1 picture per go-around. So it appears as though this family has ridden this ride over 700 times. The first picture was pretty normal. Everyone looked happy. It was a busy day and a full car of guests. The next one is rough to look at. The car is empty except for this little family, and they look so darn confused. The next 10, 15, I can see Dad getting angry, yelling. Mom is holding onto those 2 kids like her life depends on it, and you can see the kids getting increasingly upset, crying. And it goes on and on and on. After 50 or so, it looks like they're trying to get out. In one, the dad is missing. In another, they're all gone. Maybe like they've bailed early in the ride and tried to walk out, but in the very next one, they're all right back in that damn car. After around 450 or so, I only see the mom and kids. It's just when I look closely, I can see Dad, maybe just his body now, slumped down in one of the other seats. Since about 675, there's just Mom and 1 kid. Another body in another seat. The mom and kid aren't moving anymore. I think them 2 are still alive, just damn near catatonic. Looking straight ahead, pale. And, y'all, I swear on my fucking life, the dolls are moving or something. In some of these pictures, I can tell they aren't where they should be. I even saw one with a doll in the car with his family. I can't look anymore, or I'm gonna lose my lunch. I closed the album. Its file size has increased since I closed it. God, are there new pictures being added? I see on security cameras that the local PD just arrived, so they'll take over soon. I wish I knew what the fuck is going on, but I also wish this damn thing had never landed in my lap. I don't think I'll be able to update this. After I talk to the police, I think I'm gonna walk out of here and never come back. I just wanted to get this out there before Disney feeds the media some bullshit cover-up as to why a whole family vanished. They didn't vanish. I know where they are. That first story left us with chills, but hold on, because we're just getting started. If you thought that was unsettling, the next story will take you even deeper into the bizarre and unexplained. Get ready, because this one might just keep you up at night. Working at Disney, the magical world of Disney, so much goes on offstage and behind the scenes to ensure that the guests have the most magical times of their lives once they arrive on the property. Ever seen a wet paint sign while walking through the parks? How about a maintenance cast member with a bag of tools? Anyone with a construction hard hat? Of course you haven't. That would ruin the experience that WDW is perfection. It's because that 99.99% of all work goes on after the show is over. All the little mice that keep the place running like clockwork don't even start working until the announcement is made over the radios we carry that the park is now clear. Then the crews get to work. Maintenance starts buzzing around on their golf carts. The custodial cast members bring out the large hoses to wash down every inch of the streets we all walk on. And the construction crews are allowed past the security perimeter gates to come in and do whatever needs to be done. That's where my story begins. I've worked construction most of my life. When work dried up north, I moved to Florida, where some of my family had moved over 10 years ago. Naturally, I needed to find a job. I wound up applying for and getting hired by a construction company that shall remain nameless, that literally did almost all of the construction needs for the corporate mouse. I spent 5 or 6 overnights a week at various locations at WDW with coworkers. We weren't employed by Disney, hence we were not cast members, doing whatever our foreman told us what needed to be done. Sweet gig, actually, even though it was very hard work at times. Just think, how many people can truly say they get to ride around Magic Kingdom, Animal Kingdom, etc., in the dead of night, in trucks, golf carts, what have you, while the park is just about empty except for a skeleton crew? For about the first 6 months, I kind of kept to myself except for talking with the crew of the company that I worked for. Then I began noticing how chummy many of the Disney overnight crew was with our staff. Custodians, when working in the same areas as us, would come and talk to the boys as well as the overnight security cast members. I began to slowly get to know many of these folks as well. They, for the most part, were really nice. I got to know many of the night security staff, by face at least, at all 4 parks as well as the resorts. If you didn't know, WDW opened in 1971. It was actually not too uncommon to come across someone who had been a lifer with Disney or knew someone who was. 40 plus years working for the mouse. God bless him. Even my foreman, who, although did not work directly for WDW, was one of these. Boy, did they have some stories to tell to pass the time. As I adjusted more to the job, I began to get more comfortable with the surroundings. The cast members grew more social towards me, and I was able to make my way through the parks without getting lost too. Let me tell you, that is not an easy feat when you first start out working there, especially at night. Although it's not pitch black, there is very minimal lighting, except where we put our floodlights up to do work. Security is only using flashlights or the headlight of their carts to light their ways, and store lights are only on if someone is working in them. Quite eerie, and yet cool at the same time. It's like a totally different place than during operating hours. As a matter of fact, one time when I decided to visit the park as a guest, I couldn't find a ride that I wanted to go on because it looked so different during the day with all the colors, people, sounds, and music. 1 year of working at the place full time, and I had to swallow my stupid pride and go get a map. Ha ha ha. Pathetic. Anyway, as I started conversing more and more with the cast members, some of the security staff and I found out that we had a mutual interest in the paranormal. Of course, that would come up in conversation eventually when working graveyard shifts. Haha. I would get to hear stories from them all the time. The famous ghost in the Pirates of the Caribbean ride, the murder-suicide in one of the rooms of a certain resort, the jumping off of terraces at another, ghosts of cast members who passed on that come back and say hi, the spooky occurrences at rides where some unfortunate guest was killed. The stories went on and on. Although fun to hear, I won't lie, it did give the whole property an ominous feel at times that a guest will never get to experience. Even coworkers of mine had stories to tell. Attractions turning on even though the lockout, tag-out system is in place to ensure that they don't. Following someone to a break room and walking in to find no one in there. Of course, the noises and voices when they were working alone. Ghost hunters jackpot. So, several months ago, when arriving at work, the foreman called our team over for a meeting. He announced we would be starting a new assignment in the Magic Kingdom shortly. We would be working on the Seven Dwarves Mine Train ride. This attraction would be opening later in the year. How exciting. Up until now, my crew, since I had started with them, had been doing mundane yet necessary assignments. We had the pleasure of pouring concrete, digging ditches, fixing bathrooms. Good stuff. Now, we were actually going to get to work on an attraction. Imagine me getting to tell my future wife and children that I helped make this as we were riding it. They would be in awe and so proud. The building was already up for the most part, and we going to be working on making it show ready, You know, making a building look like a mine inside and out, fabricating rocks, fixating jewels, the works. When the time came to start this, he had us meet in one of the cast member break rooms inside the attraction. For those that don't know, most, if not all attractions have break rooms inside them that the public can't see. A cast member working the ride literally doesn't have to leave it if she doesn't want to, even for a lunch break. He explained the job, who would be doing what each week, and all the normal details. Then he proceeded to tell us that, as per Disney management, we were to all take our lunch breaks at 3 a.m. and to only take it in this particular break room we were in. I thought that was kind of weird. Since my employment with them began, we were never told when and where to take lunch. We used to always stagger our breaks as well so that most of the crew was always working. Whatever, I guess, the mouse paid our bills, and who the hell was I to question it? I was still the rookie, but I will say this. I saw what I was thinking in the eyes of my coworkers as well. We were only a group of 10 guys on this assignment, and we were broken up into groups of 5. One group would work on the outside, and one group on the inside of the attraction. I was in the inside group. It was a pain to work in that thing. Due to the size of the spaces where we had to work, maybe 1 or 2 floodlights would fit in an area where we were working. It gave an effect of staring into a fire in the woods. While working on a wall, it was bright as hell. When you came out of that space, you were as blind as a bat. The first few days, it became a running joke / contest of who tripped on something and broke their ass the most. Each week had to pay for the drinks when we went out together. I paid up twice the first month. Thanks, Disney. I guess you could call me paranoid, but I would never leave my lunch bag in the fridge in the break room. I'm an absolute angry asshole if I get hungry, and after having it stolen once while at Animal Kingdom, I was not going to have it happen again. So I just carried it with my other gear from then on. We were working on the opposite side of the attraction from the break room, and it was just about lunchtime. We cleaned up all the possible trip hazards and went on break. When we got to the break room, I realized I had left my bag where we were working. Damn it. There was no way I was spending $8 on a Coke and stupid bear claw from one of Disney's rip-off vending machines. I told the guys I was going to run back and get my bag, so off I went. I was hurrying along because we only get a half hour for lunch, and if we take even a minute longer to get back to our work location, there is hell to pay. And you all know how fast a half hour flies by unless you're working. Trying to make good time, I must have made a wrong turn in all that blackness. My stupid flashlight was in my tool bag. Of course. I was attempting to feel my way around the track when I saw some light coming up ahead of me. They looked like they could be a set of emergency lights, but they were quite dim and flickering. Who cares? Any port in a storm, right? I slowly made my way towards them and began to hear voices, but I couldn't make out any words. There was no one in the attraction other than us, or so we were told. Oh my God. After all the stories I was told, was I finally going to have one of my own? As much as felt the hairs on my neck stand up, I was excited as well. Even though I really like hearing about ghosts, I can't say that I am really, truly afraid of them. I just don't want them in my home. Other than that, I find the idea of them fascinating. I slowly peeked my head around the next corner. I wish to God it was a ghost I saw. It was a large, at least compared to where we were working, open space, and there was a fabricated stone slab made to look like a natural rock formation in the center. 6 figures in suits were around it in a circle. 5 were holding candles, while one was reading off what looked like an old piece of parchment. What he was saying was beyond my knowledge. Not English from what I could hear. Every time the main suit would finish a sentence or two, the others would repeat the last word. As I crouched there amazed, I saw what looked like a flash of yellow and blue stirring from on top of the altar. There was someone on it. A woman. She stirred again, and I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. It looked like one of those college program kids that get to be friends with the characters, completely dressed as Snow White. She was gagged and bound. What the hell was I seeing? Her eyes were huge and filled with fright. Tears were streaming down her face, making her overly done makeup run. As much as she struggled, she could barely move. The man with the parchment stopped reading. The others all produced some crudely made daggers and made their way to her. 2 of them went to each of her arms, 2 to her legs, and 1 stood at the top of her head. The leader, for lack of a better word, made a gesture with his hands and said one more uncomprehendable word, and the others moved in. The 2 by her arms sliced her arms from mid-bicep down to the wrists. 2 others did the same from mid-thigh to the tops of her feet. The 5th one actually carved what looked like a half moon into her forehead. I stifled a scream and closed my eyes. I could hear muffled screams and smell copper in my nostrils and taste it in the back of my throat. I opened my eyes briefly to see the leader produce a knife, walk over to the altar, and lift poor Snow White's chin up toward him. That's when I turned and ran. I got back to the break room, sprinting through the door. I must have looked half crazed because one of my buddies said, "What the hell happened to you, and where's your lunch bag?" I didn't even answer him. I just stood there. He looked me over one more time and decided to call the foreman over the radio to come talk with me. The foreman came in, took one look at me, and asked if I was feeling okay. I shook my head. He told me to go home for the remainder of my shift. I called out sick the next 3 days. In the comfort of my home, I attempted to rationalize what had happened. It had to be a gag, right? Was it my boys with an elaborate welcome to the crew trick? I mean, God, WW is crammed full of college program kids. Late teens and early 20-year-olds away from home and college, getting paid crap just so they can put Disney on their resumes, just fornicating and causing havoc every chance they get, playing tricks so they can put it on their blogs or Twitter or whatever else stupid things they use to get attention. Had to be. On my first night back to work, I literally had to force myself not to turn my car around at the security gate when the guard opened it for me to enter. When I got to the break room, one of the lifers I worked with was sitting there seemingly waiting for me. He told me to clock in, leave my stuff with him, and go meet the foreman over by the main entrance. I looked at him quizzically since it was pretty far from where the mine was, and it was heavily frowned upon for us non-cast members to be found wandering far from where we were assigned. I stated as such, and he just said, "Go. You'll be with your boss, so it would be his ass and not yours if someone says something." I made my way over to the main entrance and found him under the train station, sitting on one of the benches. He told me to sit. We sat there for about 5 minutes without speaking. He lit up a cigarette, and I did as well. During night shift, you could get away with this if you were careful about it. He asked me what had happened to me the other night. I just shrugged, looked at the newly hosed down ground, and exhaled. He put his hand on my shoulder and said that I was a great coworker. The other guys all liked me a lot. He didn't want to lose me, and that he was surprised I came back after the way I had looked. I told him that it wasn't far from the truth. He asked me if I was just sick or if something had happened. He also asked me if maybe a cast member manager had given me a hard time, and if so, he'd handle it. I shook my head and said that he wouldn't believe me and would probably fire me for being a nut if I told him. He then said something that made me feel it was okay to tell my story. He said, "I've worked here since it was just flat land and dirt roads. Nothing you say can shock me." I looked up at him in the eyes. When I saw that he was telling the truth, I began to explain everything from the beginning. I ended the story when the other guy told me to come see him. My foreman sat there, flicked his cigarette butt, and ground it onto the floor, a huge Disney no-no. He had sat there nodding through the entire story, not interrupting once. Never once a smirk, a smile, a look of disbelief. A custodial truck happened to drive by, and when the headlights flashed on us, I had seen that all the blood had seemed to drain from my foreman's face. He breathed in and exhaled once from the mouth. He had the beginnings of tears in his eyes. He finally spoke. What I'm about to tell you, kiddo, not many here have been here long enough to know, and those who do know almost never speak about. It's sort of a taboo subject, and the few that do talk about it are too old to care, or have had one too many scotches. He smiled half-heartedly at this, and I thought maybe he might stop. But he continued, I have lived in this area for almost 80 years. I have barely been out of this state, less times than I can count on one hand. Orlando has only looked this way for a short time. If you could have seen this land in the time I grew up here, you would be amazed. Marshland and orange groves, nothing else. Until Uncle Walt decided this was the spot for his next incredible theme park, there was practically nothing. Humans have been inhabiting this land for a very long time. The Ayes, the Apalachee, the Calusa, the Timucua, the Tocobago, all native Indians that lived in or around the land you are sitting on right now. The Paleo Indians were here before them, ancient lands. Well, I'm no historian, but I guess them Indians at some point figured out this land was a little spoiled. Spoiled as in not just bad, but spoiled as in how a little child throws a tantrum if it doesn't get its way. At some point, when these cultures were not having good weather or crops, what have you, they figured out that a blood sacrifice could do the trick. Every time they built a large structure in this area, they drew blood. But for whatever reason, the sacrifice had to do with the structure being built. For example, if the Indians were building a religious structure, a shaman had to be sacrificed. If a settler was building a barn or orange grove, a farmhand had to be the one. You get me? And it had to be done by the elders of the town. Couldn't be done by just anyone, but by the elders most influential ones in the area. You ever seen that movie Pet Sematary by Stephen King? Like that, but the important people involved. Do you know the story about Disney buying this land? He bought it not under the Disney brand, but hundreds of pseudo companies. He didn't want anyone to know he was going to build a theme park here because the locals may not have sold as cheaply as they did. So he did what he did. I wonder if, through all this half-truth bargaining, if him or his roundtable executives ever wondered why so many were willing to sell at that price. Were they done having to do the despicable to make a profit here? Did many of them want out? It can really make you wonder. And how come supposedly no one dies at Disney? How come all people are proclaimed dead off the property? And why do we hire so many college kids that are supposedly running rampant here? Think about it. I just gotta tell you because I think you may deserve it after you've seen what you claim to. The powers that be here are powerful. More powerful than just being Disney executives. They pretty much rule everything. You think Club 33 is exclusive? He laughed, but with no humor. The club you stumbled upon rules more than just a theme park. If you talk about what you've seen, your life may be in danger. I just sat there trying to soak in what I had just heard. This was insane. And then my foreman said one more thing before the last sentence I ever said to that nice man. If you think that was bad, just imagine what I heard as we were building It's a Small World. I swear I still hear those screams of those kids once I close my eyes at night. 0.40 years after, my reply, I quit, the magical world of Disney. I still get the shakes when I think about it. I hate every fucking Disney commercial that comes on TV, and they come on a lot. I get goosebumps every time. I see that Universal is hiring. I need work. Should I apply? My friends and I cannot stop playing a board game. It ruined our lives. I can barely remember what life was like before we found the game that June night. We were 6 high school kids bored out of our minds, trying our best to fill the void. Most of us had part-time summer jobs, but we were hesitant to spend money on anything. We all hoped to save for college. After what felt like hours going back and forth on deciding what to do for the day, we took a walk around our suburban neighborhood. It was the end of a yard sale day, and most people were packing up and heading inside. A few people still remained outside eager to sell. We didn't really have the intention to buy anything, but I still combed through the last pieces of used crap people set out. I always think I'm going to find some kind of amazing treasure, but always end up questioning my purchases hours later. I found myself digging through a shoebox full of old board games. I thought I might be able to find a new game for all of us to play. I also figured since it was the end of the day, I might get it for super cheap. At first, I only saw games that looked in too bad of shape to even buy. That, or it was a game I knew my friends wouldn't want to play. I've always been a board game fan, but not so much my friends. I had to beg them for months to play D&D with me, and they were only willing to play it for my birthday. I'm always trying to find new games that might interest them. I was ready to give up, but then I saw a game at the bottom that I'd never heard of. Tasks with Friends, with the tagline, "The game you and your friends will never want to put down." The box looked colorful and pretty worn out, but not so bad that we couldn't play with it. It just looked well loved. I tried to open it up, but the sides were taped down. I mean, it makes sense. You don't want all of the pieces to come flying out after all. I didn't see a price tag or sign for the price, so I found the owner and asked her. "Excuse me, how much are you charging for the game?" I said eagerly to the woman, while admiring the bright-colored box that lacked any company branding or trademarking. "Oh, that old thing? I don't know. Do you have $1 on you?" the woman said as she put the yard sale leftovers into one big box. As she told me the price, I perked up and started to dig through my purse. She either got annoyed with me taking too long or just wanted to be nice and told me to just take it. She immediately started to back up her box again. So, is the game any fun?" I said to her awkwardly. I actually never played it. My friend Jen gave it to me a few years back because her kids got obsessed over it or something, so she just wanted to get rid of it. She thought my family would enjoy it, but we just never got around to playing it, she said with her back facing me. I kindly thanked her and called for my friends to come over to see what I got. As I called for them, I could see their curiosity over what I found. That excitement was quickly lost when they saw I had a board game in my hands. They rolled their eyes knowing that I would try and get them to play it with me. "Kate, you know we don't do the board game thing," Aaron said to me, annoyed. "Come on, guys. You've all been going on and on all day about how bored you are. At least try. This game looks really fun. I actually haven't played this one before, so we can all learn together," I said as I saw their faces start to grow curious again. James came up to me and gestured at the box in my hand. I gave it over to him, hoping that he would be convinced to play after looking at it. I knew if he was down to play, everyone else would be too. As he held the box, I could see the expression on his face change from doubt to excitement. "Damn, this game looks like fun. Let's go play," he said with a giddy tone I'd never heard him use. He started to jog in the direction of his house with me close behind, and the rest of our friends slowly walking behind me, looking confused as to why James was so excited to play a board game when he was normally the person most against them. We all made it back to James's house. We walked in and were greeted by his mom, confused as to what made her emotionless son so excited. As we stood in the entryway, not sure what to say, we heard him calling us from the basement. We ran down the steps to see the game fully set up on the floor and ready to play. He was sitting on a pillow reading the instructions with intense concentration. "James, are we actually playing this game?" Rewind. "Yes, we are. I promise if you just sit down and start to play, you will have fun. I had a chance to learn the rules while you guys got here," James insisted as he shuffled a pile of cards one last time. After a few minutes of back and forth, everyone was sitting down and ready to play. James explained the rules of the game directly from the intrusion manual. Each player starts with their token at the start of the board. Players will take turns drawing a card from the top of the deck. Each card will have a task. If that task is completed, you may move the number of spaces that are specified on the card. Once you see the card, it will say secret or public at the top. If it's a secret card, do not read it out loud. This task must be completed without anyone noticing or questioning the action on the card. For example, hold someone's hand, sing a song, insult someone, etc. Just complete the task without anyone calling you out. If a player does something you believe to be a secret task, say out loud deceiver. If the player was caught, they will show their card and failed their task. Do not move any pieces. If the person who calls out a deceiver wrongly accuses the player, then they must move back one space. The accused player will keep that card and continue to try and complete the task. Once you have successfully completed a secret task, you may announce a task complete and move your token forward as many spaces as specified on your task card. If you pull a public card, you must read it out loud. These cards will include things like saying the alphabet backwards, don't say 'em, or until your next turn, singing a karaoke song, playing dead for 1 minute, etc. Some cards have time limits and specific instructions. Every card will clearly state the task. The player who gets their token to the end of the board wins. The game will start with the player who lied last drawing a card. Take turns drawing one card at a time with the person to your right going next. Have fun. James folded the paper instructions up and sat them by his side, asking if anyone had questions. No one said anything. It seemed like they all understood the game fine, or maybe they just didn't care yet. "All right, let's get the game started," James proclaimed, but was met with blank stares. "Come on, guys, I just read the rules. You should know how the game starts. We have to start with who lied last." Everyone remained silent. No one wanted to say their last lie. "This is so dumb. I guess I'll go. I told my mom that Henry wasn't hanging out with us when I left the house. There, I'll go first," Bree blurted out as she leaned forward to grab a card. As she looked at it, she rolled her eyes. "This is so dumb. Why are we playing this game?" "Come on, Bree, it can't be that bad. Can you read it out loud?" Henry said, sensing that the card was embarrassing. Public card. Pretend to be a cow for 3 minutes." She threw the card down and looked at Henry, who was to her right, expecting her turn to just be over and not wanting to even try. The rest of the group started to laugh and encourage her, chanting her name and begging her to do it. After about a minute, she gave in and got down on her hands and knees. When she first started, she was annoyed, staring daggers at Henry. As her time ran down, I could see in her face her feelings towards the game change. When the timer went off, she didn't stop for a few seconds. She kept going because she was laughing so hard. "That was so fun. Someone moved my token up one space. Henry, it's your turn now," Bree said with a giggle and a newfound excitement. Henry looked at her in disbelief. He was so used to her cold exterior, but liked that this game made it melt away. Henry picked up his card. He motioned, zipping his lips shut, and shook his head. Me, Bree, and James all squealed in excitement, with the rest of the group looking lost, not understanding what they missed that got us so excited. Since Henry had a secret card, it was AJ's turn. She was chuckling along, but clearly just doing it because she didn't want to look dumb for asking us what was so funny. She pulled her card and read it out loud. It's a public card," she said with a dry tone, trying to gauge the room and observe everyone else as they celebrated her public card. "It says I have to do jumping jacks until my next turn." As she stood up, everyone in the room cheered her on except for Aaron. As she got to her feet, she paused and looked over at Aaron. I can imagine he felt like the only sane person in the room and wasn't sure what was going on. After a second of hesitation, she started her jumping jacks. Aaron looked around at us, eyeing him down desperately, waiting for him to read his card. By the time he finally picked up his card, AJ had started to laugh while doing her jumping jacks. "Sorry, it's a secret card," Aaron said nervously as everyone wiggled with happiness. "Well, looks like it's my turn," I said as I leaned forward, but was cut off by Henry quickly standing to his feet and lunging towards AJ. Tackling her to the ground, interrupting her jumping jacks, and making a loud thump as they hit the ground. "Henry, what the hell are you doing? What's wrong with you?" Aaron yelled in a serious tone that turned into him trying not to laugh by the end of the sentence. "I'm calling a deceiver on that tackle, Henry," Bree stated with a laugh. Okay, you got me," Henry said while still laying on AJ from his tackle. They both smiled over the event, even though it clearly hurt when they hit the floor. But you have to admit, that one was tricky. I tried to start my turn again, but was interrupted by Aaron. "Ha! Task completed. I yelled at Henry and didn't get caught. I get to move 2 spaces, he said as he smugly moved his token 2 spaces on the game board. We kept playing the game for hours. We finished the first game and everyone wanted to play again, and again, and again. I looked around at them in disbelief. It felt impossible that all my friends were enjoying a board game. It was a dream come true. After years of begging. Finally. Normally at hangouts like this by 10 p.m., Bree and Henry would wander off to make out in some closet. AJ goes home to sleep, and Aaron, James, and I are left to awkwardly try and find something to do with just the three of us. It got to be 2 a.m., and we were either exhausted, or our parents calling us telling us to come home, or we would be in serious trouble. We all went back to our houses, but all had a hard time going to sleep. We stayed up until 5 a.m. for some of us, just talking about the game over text. Strategies, when we could play again, funny things that happened that night. We couldn't get enough. The games we played started out pretty simple. No tasks got too wild, and while we really loved to play, it wasn't like it was taking over our whole lives. Not yet, at least. Because we played the game at James's house the first time, we ended up just keeping it there. Even though the game was technically mine, we always hung out at his place, so it just made sense. It was around 10 a.m. the next day when our group chat started to blow up, with everyone asking when we could get together that day. Now, because it was summertime and we were all teenagers, we either had work in the mornings or most of us slept until noon, but not me. I was always up early waiting for my friends to get up so I had something to do, or trying to make some money as a dog walker. That being said, I was shocked when I saw that everyone was up and everyone claimed to not have work. James didn't have a job at that point, so of course he was free, but everyone else was too. That did not happen often. We all met up at James's place at around 11 a.m. that same day. Everyone eager to play. We must have played 10 games that day. The games consisted of us doing accents, being banned from saying certain words, backflips, and so on. Nothing too weird. We realized after a few games that we never got a repeating card. Not one time. This was strange because there were probably 200 cards in the deck, but even with us playing a dozen games, every card was new. I knew I had a couple of dogs to walk that evening, but texted the owners to cancel. No way was I going to leave while all my friends were enjoying a board game this much. I knew AJ said something about her having a shift at 4 p.m., but when the time got close, she went to the other side of the room and called out of work. She didn't even mention it to us or talk about it. She just stood up, walked to the corner, talked to her manager, and came back. No one thought anything of it. After a few minutes, she loudly proclaimed, "Task completed," moving her token up 3 spaces. We looked around confused at what task she had, and the card said, "Call out sick to work." We were surprised by this card, to say the least. It was the first time a card had to do with something outside of the players. Everyone else in the group canceled any plans they had for the rest of the day. Although AJ was the only person who completed a task for it. It was around 11 p.m., which made it a full 12 hours of the game. Bree pointed out that we forgot to eat any food all day. After thinking about it, I realized that I hardly drank any water and went to the bathroom like one time all day. Things started to get out of hand that night. AJ pulled a card that said to go into a closet with the player to her left and kiss them for 5 minutes. Of course, that player was Henry. Bree was not happy, but she knew how serious everyone was about the game. She told him she wasn't okay with it, but he insisted that it was just a game, and it wouldn't mean anything. It was worth 4 points for both people who would go into the closet. AJ and Henry stood up and went to find a suitable space, all while Bree freaked out and said she would end things with Henry if he went through with it. It was never completely clear what Henry and Bree were. They don't like to use boyfriend and girlfriend, but everyone knew they were a thing. Aaron tried to call it off, saying this wouldn't be worth it and to just stop, but it was like they didn't even hesitate. Bree sat on the carpet and started to cry as the timer on her phone counted down an agonizing 5 minutes. I thought I would either hear kissing or nothing at all, but instead, I heard talking. It started as soft whispers, then crying and yelling. They stayed in for about 2 minutes, then came tumbling out. "That's it, Henry. I can't believe you would do that for a game." "We are over," Bree said with a red, wet face. Henry came and silently sat down with AJ. AJ was now beet red as well. Despite three of my friends just going through something I couldn't wrap my head around, they all looked at James calmly and nodded for him to pull his card. No one had moved any tokens forward, so it was clear they failed their task of kissing in the closet. James hesitantly leaned in for a card and read it to himself as we were bombarded by Bree, AJ, and Henry all saying, "Task completed," and then shot confused faces at each other. They all threw down their cards and moved their tokens forward. Bree's card said, "Break up with Henry," so Henry's card said, "Make AJ cry," and AJ's card said, "Tell Henry you love him." All those cards were worth way more than the stupid kissing card, so the kissing task was ignored, and they all individually completed their "our tasks" without ever communicating it with each other. They all saw opportunities to complete a task worth more points, and they took it. After this moment, it was like nothing even happened. The girls stopped crying and started laughing and saying how impressive the completion of the tasks were. "Wait, guys, something's wrong here. Do you not see it?" Aaron said with concern, trying to take a break from the game. "Oh, stop. You are just jealous you didn't get to move 6 spaces," Bree said with arrogance. "No, I'm not talking about that. Does no one find it weird that the cards are using our names now? Not only that, but the cards are somehow interacting with other cards to almost try and make bad things happen," James blurted. As he said that, it was like we all froze in our spots, all looking at each other, realizing how hungry and tired we were, looking around at the room, seeing how big of a mess we made, Bree grabbing Henry's hand with a look of sadness and coming to grips with how they hurt each other for a game. I looked down at my arm and was reminded of the crud things I had drawn on my arm with Sharpies in order to move 1 space in an earlier game. I saw Aaron's jeans that were now cut into shorts with some kid's scissors. I looked at James's legs and saw his one shaved leg lying crossed over the untouched hairy one. I looked at AJ and saw she had a huge purple bruise on her arm. At that moment, I remembered feeling like an addict trying to get off drugs. I knew this game was hurting us. I wanted to stop, but felt like I couldn't. I could see the same feeling in all my friends' eyes, too. The urge to say one more game. Just one more time. Just to feel the high of this dumb game again. I think we need to take a break from this game, guys. It's getting kind of weird and out of hand. I murmured with the strength that I somehow mustered up. It was like telling an alcoholic you were taking away their beer. They all looked horrified at the idea of not playing the game for even a moment. Just then, James's mom came downstairs and was horrified at what she was looking at. 6 disheveled teenagers all sitting in a circle, looking like they had all just been through a war. Not only that, but her whole basement was a mess. "James, what the hell happened to your leg? Are you all playing that dumb game again? I can't believe this. Everyone out of my house. James, you are grounded," his mom shouted with rage in her voice. We all ran out of his house, not saying a word to each other, just trying to get home and get some food. As I sat in my kitchen with my long-sleeved sweatshirt covering my now inked-up arm, I tried to eat a sandwich I made myself. I was starving. I could feel and hear my stomach growling, but my need to play the game was so much stronger. So strong, I didn't even want to eat. I sat at my dining room table staring at that sandwich for what felt like an eternity, telling myself that I needed to eat, and I'd feel better if I did, but somehow the thought of the game was taking up all my energy. I was holding back the urge to text my friends. It took every ounce of self-control I had left. I felt my phone buzz in my pocket, and I involuntarily grabbed my phone so fast it was in my hand before I could even think about it. It was James in our group chat. "Hey guys, so do you think that was a long enough break? I think I can find where my mom put the game and bring it to that old treehouse back behind Mr. Baker's house." I couldn't hold back anymore. I had to play again. Before I knew it, I was sneaking out of my house trying to remember where the old treehouse was. As I ran through the neighborhood, my phone lit up with texts from my friends saying they were on their way. After running around for a while, I found the treehouse. I couldn't believe I had such a hard time finding it, considering how much time a few of us used to spend in it during middle school. I could hear all of their voices sounding annoyed as I was the last one to get there. I climbed up the old wooden ladder to find all my friends sitting in a perfect circle, barely able to see the board or each other. It was around this time something strange happened within the game. It wasn't about winning the game necessarily, it was about playing as many games as possible and completing as many tasks as we could. If anyone won a game or finished a task, everyone felt a high, not just the winner. Because of this, players stopped calling each other out for trying to complete secret tasks, so people stopped being so secretive to complete secret tasks. They still kept them a secret because it was a rule of the game, just no one called them out. This made us all more ruthless. I sat down on the hardwood in between Bree and James. Our next game began. AJ drew a card first, and it was a secret card. She didn't seem giddy. She looked flushed and scared. In fact, it felt like the mood had shifted with everyone. We weren't laughing our butts off anymore. We were terrified to stop playing. It was something in our guts that made us have to play, like a virus growing in us, desperately trying to get out. Next, Aaron drew a card and read it out loud. "Hold your breath for 5 minutes," he whispered with confusion. "How am I supposed to do that?" he said, trying to not get worried. It's not that the card was all that bad. It's that he knew he would stop at nothing to make it happen. He told us to keep playing the game while he did it, and got a timer up on his phone. He took a few deep breaths, then held his nose shut, and became extremely focused, not making eye contact with anyone. Next, it was James's turn. He had a secret card and didn't show much emotion towards it. Next, Bree nervously took a card, and yet again, it was a secret card. In fact, we all drew a secret card until it was Aaron's turn again. It had been about 45 seconds, and he was really focusing, and we didn't want to make him draw a card while trying to finish his task. As we sat and watched our friend become more and more red from holding his breath, we found ourselves in complete silence. Other than the wind weaving its way through the trees outside and the soft sound of crickets in the distance, we all just stared at each other, terrified of what was on those secret cards. I knew I had to use every little bit of self-control I had left in my body to not try and complete the task on my card. I was betting that's why everyone was being so quiet. They all had tasks that they didn't want to do, but felt the uncontrollable urge to do it. My card said that I needed to remove one of James's fingers by any means necessary. It was worth 10 points. I couldn't believe I wanted to complete it so badly, but I was frozen figuring out how to do it. As I stared at him, I noticed he was looking over at Bree. I figured that his card had something to do with her. It seemed like everyone was fixated on someone else. I glanced down at the timer Aaron had, and I was amazed to see he had been holding his breath for almost 2 minutes. Just as I was about to comment on it, chaos broke loose, everyone jumping on to someone else, making it one big pile of people viciously grabbing each other. I didn't read their cards myself, but it was clear by their actions what their tasks were. Of course, as you know, I was going for James's fingers, but James's was ripping at Bree's ear. Bree was pulling Henry's hair out. Henry was tearing at AJ's neck, and AJ was trying to open my mouth to get my tongue. For a solid 30 seconds, we were all attaching each other when Aaron passed out from holding his breath. This seemed to snap us out of our trance for a bit. We ran over to our friend and checked his pulse. After we realized he was still breathing, we got lost in the game again, and all jumped on each other to keep brutalizing one another. Just as I got my teeth around James's pinky finger, we saw a bright flashlight coming through the cracks in the treehouse and froze. A police officer popped his head through the bottom entrance to the treehouse and looked at us in horror. He saw Aaron out cold in the corner alone with the rest of us in a pile of blood and ripped out hair. The officer grabbed us one by one and practically threw us to the ground, where another officer put us each in handcuffs. We had hours and hours of questioning that night, but we were all released by sunrise. No one was badly injured, just a lot of cuts, bruises, and a few patches of hair missing. Even Aaron was okay. Honestly, Aaron made it out in the best shape. We all got grounded for the rest of the summer. All the parents agreed that we needed to stop spending time together because they insisted on us having some beef between us all. None of us mentioned the board game was at the treehouse that night because we didn't want them to take it away from us. We knew we had to play it again. However, they caught on to it and banned us from ever playing it again. We spent the next 3 weeks of summer miserable. Each one of us tried to fill the hunger to play the game by playing other board games or attempting to remake it, but it wasn't the same. It was the night before school started, and I got a message from James through Skype. Our parents banned us from talking to each other, but it seemed my parents and James's parents forgot about Skype. He told me I had to come over right now. I managed to hop out my window and ran for James's house. I got to his house in what felt like record time and jumped down the fire escape to the basement. There I saw the rest of my friends all sitting by the fireplace weeping. As I got closer, I saw they were covered in ash. I saw tiny little bits of what was left of the game lying out on the ground. "She burned it, my mom burned it," James said in between tears. Everyone was desperately trying to find any pieces that were left of our precious game. Some of them rubbed the ashes of the game on their faces and arms to try and feel something again. As I watched them, I saw something in the corner of my eye. I looked over to our normal hangout area and saw it. I saw the board game sitting out. Not just the box, but the whole game was out and ready to play. Are you sure that your mom burned it, James?" I said as my eyes got glazed over, looking at the beautiful board game sitting out for us to enjoy. "Yes, I'm sure. She did it right in front of me, so I'd stop looking for it." Just as James finished his sentence, he looked at me and then at my eyeline. He saw the game. The next week of our lives was a whirlwind. After James's mom burned the game and it reappeared, we all ran away with the game. We stole a car from AJ's mom after we got a task card for it and left town. We would play the game in the car, in random fast food restaurants, and sometimes in parks. It's all we did all day. We would fall asleep playing the game and only manage to eat maybe a bag of chips or something small during the day. We kept moving because we didn't want to be found. In that week, we all managed to lose our jobs and all missed the first week of our senior year of high school. All because we were addicted to a board game. I still remember the last game we ever played. It was a late Sunday night. We were actually in our town sitting in an old barn near the treehouse we sat in before. All because the board game told us to. Up to that point, we were hanging out far away from home. We didn't want to be so close. We knew we could be found easily by our families and the authorities if we were too close, but we had no choice. We were slaves to the game. At this point, we were in bad shape. With every new game started, we broke down a little bit more. We surrounded the board with tired eyes and growling stomachs, missing teeth and bruised bodies, concussed heads and broken toes. "Please, we have to stop. I can't do it anymore. I want to go home," Bree said as we were about to start our next game. "I can't imagine not playing this game. It's all I ever want to do. I think I might die if I couldn't play it. I know the game hurts us, but it would hurt so much more if we stopped playing it," Henry said with a gravelly voice. "Guys, why are we talking? We have to play again," Aaron said while trying not to cough. "I know we have to. I've never hated something and loved something so much in my whole life," Bree remarked. We started the game with shaky hands, moving slowly and holding our breath whenever someone looked at their card. AJ went first. She reached down and picked a card, cringing to herself after reading it in her head. Next was Bree. She rolled her eyes and she read off the words. "Public card. Waterboard the player to your right for 5 minutes. Both players move 8 spaces," Bree timidly said as she glanced at James sitting next to her. I can't say we really knew how to waterboard someone, but we laid him on his back with his legs elevated and dripped water over him. We let him take a card for his turn before Bree started the waterboarding, so we didn't have to wait for 5 minutes for them to be done. His card was a secret card. We continued the game with the awful background sounds of gagging and choking. Next, it was Aaron's turn. He read his card and winced. He closed his eyes tight and opened them again, as if he was hoping he was in a dream. As he opened his eyes, he slowly looked at all of us, making eye contact with each one of us. Just then, James was done being waterboarded, and he and Bree came to join us. I was so glad they were done. Not just because I was sick of the sounds, but because it meant they got to move 8 spaces. Aaron stood to his feet slowly. I prepared myself because I figured he was about to hurt us. In an instant, he ran out of the barn and into our stolen car. We all looked around confused as to where we went, but kept playing the game as he drove off. Next, it was my turn. Public card, jump off the roof of the barn, 9 points, I said out loud nervously. Henry and AJ jumped up and started to walk outside, not even questioning if I would do it or not. They weren't wrong in the assumption. Before I could even think, I was on my feet trying to find a way up to the roof. I found my way to the top of the 10-foot-tall building. I took a deep breath and leaped off, and was met with a hard thump as I hit the ground. I felt a gut-wrenching pain in my right ankle as I landed. I knew I broke it. I had no doubt in my mind. I was thrashing in pain, grabbing my ankle as my friends dragged me back into the barn. We knew we had to keep playing. Next, Henry took a card. He picked it from the pile with his eyes closed and brought it to his face, while peeking just enough to see the words on the card. Then closed his eyes again, trying to pretend he never read the words in the first place. Next, AJ took a card. Even though it was a secret card, I knew it was about me. She glanced down at my ankle right after her eyes left the card. Just as James was reaching for his card, we saw Aaron walk back into the barn. We all sat in shock as his silhouette became clear and vivid in the doorway. Blood trickled down his arms and hands, dripping on the dirt as we all stared at each other. His eyes were blank at first, but then turned to pain. We watched him as he walked from the doorway to the game board, blood dripping on the game as he moved his token 30 spaces. Aaron, what have you done? 30 spaces, AJ muttered in fear. James, I'm so sorry I had to. Aaron whimpered as sat in the dirt with his secret task card crinkled in his bloodied fist. Tell me what you did right now. What the hell does your card say? Show us, James yelled as he stood to his feet. Just as James was about to jump onto Aaron, Henry reached into his pocket and pulled out some matches we used to start small campfires while we had been on the run. We all stood still, waiting to see what he was about to do, as he lit 3 matches and threw them into the nearby hay bales, igniting the whole inside of the barn. Without hesitation, AJ saw the opportunity and stomped on my ankle as hard as she could. If it wasn't broken before, it sure was now. I looked down at it to see it now bent sideways. She then stomped on my other ankle, not breaking it, but making it so I couldn't walk. She moved her token 12 spaces. Even though I was in agony from the pain, I still felt such an intense high from her moving so many spaces. Aaron dropped his card in the midst of everything happening. James fell to his feet to see the card and started to weep as he read it out loud. Secret card, kill James's mom. Move 30 spaces, he said with anger bubbling up. I can't believe you would do that for a dumb game. How could you do this to me? I couldn't control myself. Come on, you know what I mean. I couldn't control myself. Don't do anything you will regret, Aaron said cautiously. Oh, I think it's a little too late for not doing things we regret, James said as he jumped onto Aaron, choking him with all his strength. It seemed at that moment he was able to break free from the control of the game. He wasn't feeling the high of someone else completing a task. He just felt hate. Red, hot hate. I was overwhelmed, to say the least. The barn was in flames. James was trying to kill Aaron, and to make matters worse, AJ out of nowhere jumped up and dug a pocket knife into Bree's stomach. Now Bree and AJ were in a fighting match too. Henry and I sat across from each other in disbelief at our surroundings. He looked at me with death in his eyes as he reached for a card. It wasn't even his turn, but I don't think he cared anymore. He knew the others would be occupied for a while. The fire was getting bad. I knew I had to get out of that barn as soon as I could. Because of the damage done to my ankles, I couldn't walk, so I dragged my body out of the barn, taking the game with me. I made it a few feet and looked back to see Henry not moving. He set his card down on the board before I started to drag it with me, and I read it as I continued to crawl. Secret card. Let the fire overtake you. Move your token to the finish line and win the game. I was able to get out of the barn with the board game in hand. I sat and watched as the flames overtook Henry. He didn't even flinch when he caught on fire. As I saw it happen, I moved his token to the end space so he could win the game. I felt an intense high overtake my body as the game was complete. Only a few moments after Henry caught fire, the whole barn came down, with all my friends in it. I looked at the burning barn and then back down at the game. I'm ashamed to say that my biggest worry was not knowing who I play with now. I hate myself for thinking that, but that's how all the game is. I tried to start a new game by myself and drew a card, but that's when I saw the sirens of police cars and fire trucks pull up next to me. I was immediately surrounded by people trying to give me medical attention, taking me away from my game. I scratched and threw my body around like a toddler not getting their way. I remember them giving me some kind of sedative and waking up in the hospital. I was the only person to make it out alive that night. All I could say to the doctors and my parents was that I needed the game, that I had to play the game. It was the only meaning to life. It was the only reason I had to live. My parents got me a great lawyer, and I got out of everything by pleading insanity. Our families all knew the right people and had the right money to ensure the word never got out about the deaths. They even managed to make the death of James's mom disappear. When they told me my friends were all dead, I didn't have much of a reaction. I just kept asking where the game was. When they eventually told me the game was gone and never coming back, that's when I lost it. They had to put me into restraints because I kept hurting the hospital staff from my meltdowns. I started to threaten the staff and told them all the horrible things that would happen to them if they didn't get that game back to me. I eventually ended up in a psychiatric hospital. I yelled and screamed so much that I never had my voice. I hardly ever slept because all I thought about was the game and how I craved to play it again. My skin was red and torn up from my insistent picking due to the withdrawals. After months, I felt numb. Maybe from all the drugs they pumped me up with, or perhaps I was so used to the withdrawals I didn't feel it as much. It still felt like I had an uncontrollable urge inside my bones, but I was able to hide it. They then sent me home after a while. I knew I had to mask my emotions for the game, pretend I didn't care anymore, even if it killed me inside to say it out loud. I walked into my bedroom and I felt like I was being treated like a baby. My old bed frame was gone and it was just the mattress on the floor. All my sharp shelves were taken down, along with anything else I could possibly hurt myself with. I rolled my eyes but knew my parents had to make these changes for me to even come home. I sat on my bed and I looked around at my room, now with a doorknob that locked from the outside to keep me in, as well as bars on my windows. I searched my room desperately to find something to take up my mind. That's when I dug through my closet and I saw it. I saw that beautiful, colorful box that I came to know so well, just hiding in the back of my closet waiting to be found. I knew it came back the first time it was destroyed, but it was feeling like it was a one-time thing. But here it was, patiently waiting for me to come and play it. I ripped open the box, giving myself a paper cut in the process, and started to play the game by myself. With all that being said, I can finally say task completed and share what my first card said in that solo game. Secret card, spread the word about this game online so more people can join us. Move 20 spaces. So, what do you say? Care to come join me for a game? Retired paramedic story time. I should write a book about my paramedic days. I posted this in a different /r and had quite the response. Thought I'd share it here. Retired paramedic here. Had a call on a very desolate stretch of road for a car sitting in the middle of the road, covered in blood. Of course, it has to happen at 2 a.m., just like every horror story. We arrive on scene and find a new Camaro sitting in the middle of the road that had obviously been in an accident. Problem is, there's absolutely nothing else around the car. No persons, no other vehicles, nothing. Part of my job then was a tactical paramedic for our sheriff's department. Sounds all exciting, and high speed, low drag, nope, not as a medic. I got paid to wait for stuff to happen and sit in the rear with the gear. This being said, my paramedic partner and I both had pistols in the ambulance. As we start approaching the Camaro, my partner is shining a light around when he says really low, hushed and rushed, back, 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 now, now, now. He says, I shine my light in the car and there is intestines wrapped around the gear shifter and a lung in the back seat, so we kind of freak out, call dispatch, let them know what's happening, and we are in the process of getting out of there till the cops show up when we see a figure appear walking down the road towards us. As he gets closer, we see he is covered in blood and gore. We both throw on our tactical vests, helmets, snatch our pistols, as I sound like a frightened Home Alone 9-year-old on the radio to dispatch. We approach and start screaming at him to get on the ground, which he does. After everyone's heart rate is below 200 BPM, we start talking and figure out what happened. This guy had purchased a brand new Camaro and drove it to this desolate stretch of road to open it up. He said 1 minute he's shifting gears, and the next thing he knows his car is all over the road and his mouth was full of blood, and it seemed like an explosion had went off. I start looking his injuries over and can't really see anything major, and ask him about the passenger in his car. He says, "What passenger?" My partner says, "There's a lung in your back seat." Dude goes straight into mental overload and can't come up with anything, so I'm thinking he's hurt. Get him in the ambulance. Police are 5 minutes away. We potentially have another victim out there. I have to go look by myself. I walk through the crash scene, look in the car, and sure enough, intestines wrapped around the gear shifter, lung in the back seat, looks like parts of a liver. Looks like a hand grenade went off inside the car. I walk around the other side of the car and see a faint blood smear stain on the road. Walk to it, see something else further down the road, so I keep walking towards it. I finally see something on the side of the road and run up to it. Honestly, completely freaked out and scared to death about the body I was about to see. And the dude had hit a deer. What happened is when he was winding the car out, state police estimated him well over 100 miles per hour. A deer jumped into his car's pathway and hit the top corner of the windshield with its stomach. When the windshield crashed, it created a negative vacuum in the car, sucking almost all of the deer's organs out and into his car and all over him. I had the fire department decontaminate him, wrapped him in some blankets, and took him to the hospital. And just when you think it couldn't get any stranger, our next story takes us even deeper into the unknown. Prepare yourself, because this next tale will leave you questioning what's real and what lurks in the shadows. The monster that married my mom. This is a story that happened when I was very young. It started around the time I was 5 back in the 80s and was the beginning of the worst 5 years of my life. I was a teenage unplanned pregnancy, so my mom was a single mom for the first few years of my life. It wasn't too bad though. My mom and I were not alone. We lived with my mom's parents, my grandparents. My mom's younger sister was also still living at home. We were safe and happy. Then my mom met a guy, let's call him Joe for privacy purposes. Joe seemed like a dream come true. He was nice to me and my mom. He took us places and brought us gifts. It was awesome. And when he proposed, my mom and I were both happy. They got married and my mom thought we would now be a happy family. We didn't know how wrong we were. It started off great. At first, we had left my grandparents and moved into a home together. We had some really good times, but things took a turn for the worse. After the first few months, Joe had a really bad temper, and it would come out when my mom or I upset him. He would yell, throw things, and break stuff. Then he started hitting my mom and me. He would punch and kick us. He got worse and worse. He started beating me up to get back at my mom. It was a nightmare for 3 years. My mom was too scared to leave him or tell on him. I was too small when I told people thought I was lying, because I wanted to go back to my grandparents' house. The weirdest thing was Joe was a lot like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. We had some really good times, vacations, holidays, and more. When he was nice, it was amazing. When his other side came out, it was hell. We did finally have something good and bad happen. My mom was pregnant. She was happy to be a mom again, and I was excited to be a big brother. It was also bad though, because we were further tied to Joe, and who knew what he would do to the baby. When my baby brother was born, things were good for a while. We were pretty happy. I had withdrawn a lot, though I stayed in my room watching TV and reading. I figured out of sight, out of mind. I thought if I avoided Joe, he wouldn't bother me. I should have continued this plan, but I was blinded with the happiness and peace that came with my brother's birth. It all started back one day. Joe had a toothache and was in a foul mood. He had been yelling at my mom all day. My brother was teething and had been fussy, so Joe was extra grumpy, yelling at her to get the baby quiet. My mom called me to dinner, and I walked out of my room. I was walking slowly and quietly because I didn't want to make Joe any more upset. Well, I guess I went too slow and got in the way because he got mad, yelled, and threw the remote control and hit me in the side of the head and eye. It was terrible. I was bleeding and bruised. My mom had finally had enough and left him with me and my brother. We went to my grandparents' house. They took pictures of my eye and called the police, but they wouldn't do anything. Social services investigated, but they didn't do anything either. We were happy at my grandparents and safe, but Joe was very slick. He called my mom and said the right words, and after a while talked her into coming back with promises to be better. He actually was for a while, but then he went back to his old ways. He even tried to beat my brother. I took a lot of beatings for him because I love him and wanted to protect him. It all came crashing down one December night when I was 9. My mom had forgotten to pay the phone bill and the phone got turned off. She was at work working a double second and third shifts, and Joe was due to go into the same plant for his third shift in a different department. He was enraged when he found out the phone was off. He drugged me out of bed, and we drove up the store just up the road from our house. He called my mom at work on the payphone. He was yelling and cussing at her about the phone bill. Then he said something that sent chills down my spine. He told her if she didn't get home in an hour, he would kill me. I was terrified. We went back to the house and I went to my room. Joe kept ranting and raving. I was so scared he called me into the living room and attacked me. He was beating me with a belt all over. He grabbed me and threw me into a wall. He pulled the chin cabinet down on top of me. He grabbed a broom and continued to beat me. The beating kept up on and off for several hours. I was in pain and covered in bruises and blood. It was time for him to go to work. He got dressed to go and told me that if I went to school in the morning, he would beat me when I got home. I guess he knew with all my wounds the school would do something. I was scared, but I needed help. I couldn't change out of my pajamas because I hurt too much. I slowly limped my way to my bus stop barefoot and still in my Incredible Hulk pajamas. The bus driver pulled up, opened the door, took one look at me and got me on the bus and immediately drove to school. Then everything moved so fast. Before I knew it, I was talking to social services and the police. They ended up taking me to my grandparents who got custody of me. I was happy to be with my grandparents whom I love and happy to be safe, but I missed my mom and my brother. Strangely enough, the police never did anything to my stepfather. It was a different time, I guess. It was a few more years before my mom got the courage and left him, but she finally did. She ended up meeting a high school sweetheart and getting remarried. She and my brother finally had a happy life like I did, and we were back in each other's life. I found out later that my stepfather had been orphaned at the young age of 5 when his parents and older sister died when his dad's small plane crashed. He was then raised by a very physically and mentally abusive aunt and uncle. Doesn't excuse what he did, but it explains it. I eventually ran into him on social media. I forgave him and let go of the anger and hurt I had been holding on to. He had gotten a lot of mental help and seemed to be doing good. I convinced my brother to talk to him because Joe was his biological dad, and Joe had found his mom's family and extended members of his dad's family whom he lost touch with when his parents died. I told my brother that it would be good for him to meet some of his family from his father's side as he had never met them. I don't know my dad at all and would have loved to have that connection, as Joe continued to change and work hard to be better. I strangely enough became his biggest cheerleader. He would come to me for advice or to get me to mediate between he and my brother if they bumped heads as their relationship tended to be rocky. My brother is like my mom, he holds on to grudges a long time. I don't know who I am, like being willing to forgive and forget. I know some of you will think I'm crazy for forgiving him and actually helping him, but it really brought me an inner peace. And also, I took pity on him for what he had been through as a child. That kind of trauma could turn anyone into a monster, which is why I went to lots of therapy to help me get over mine. Just when you think the chills have settled, the next story pulls you deeper into the abysses in the shadows. Get ready to dive into a tale where the line between reality and nightmare blurs. You might want to keep the lights on for this one. A rather odd childhood experience. Hey, so I saw the other stories and felt I might try and share mine. So I lived in Austin, TX for most of my childhood, and I had a friend, let's just call him John. So one day, my mom decided to leave me home alone, and me being a teenager, invited John over to play Xbox with me. About 30 minutes into our meetup, we hear a crack that sounds like it came from upstairs. We thought it was one of my cats. I have two. So we didn't pay much mind to it. 3 hours into out meetup, my power cuts off. My friend says he's got to leave and his mom wants him back, and after maybe 5 minutes, he left. I spend about half an hour watching TV and decide to hit the hay. I wake up at about 2:30 in the morning to what sounds like a muffled scream, and that makes me fucking freeze up. I wait for any other sign of noise, and sure enough, I hear the back door open. My dumbass forgot to lock it, and this was fucking horrific. See, I'm a pretty big guy, but I was scared shitless. I grab a hammer from my nightstand that I was using a couple days before this to hammer nails into my wall so I could hang some art. But I hear what sounds like heavy-ass footsteps getting closer. I get into my closet and dial 911. I basically told them that there was somebody in my house and that I was in the closet and to get there as quickly as they fucking could. About 5 minutes pass and I hear him coming up the stairs and he stops right by my door. I left the fucking Xbox on in my room. I hear him step into the room, then I hear him freeze, and after about 5 seconds he runs. I hear sirens and I mumble, "Thank fucking God, man." I hear him close the door and I look out the window to see a cop car parked, and I notice a cop running into my backyard. They saw him. I decide to go downstairs onto my porch and I see the man. He is pale as fuck, probably whiter than a cloud. He is skinny as hell too, and the weirdest fucking thing though, this guy didn't have any lips. I was shocked, but if you thought that was weird, well, they got him into cuffs and into the cop car, then he vomits fucking blood onto the goddamn window. They drove off about a minute later. I later find out he died of drug overdose that night. Turns out he was high on meth. Well, that's my creepy little rant of an experience I had as a teen. I have a couple more, but if y'all want, I'll share them. Just when you think it's safe to breathe, the shadows reveal another story. This next tale will remind you why the unknown is often best left alone. Ready for the next chapter? Truck stops are either haunted or portals to hell. I worked in the truck stop industry for about 15 years. All of the following stories took place at the same location. I worked there less than 18 months. If people are interested, I have other stories at other locations, but this one had the most frequent occurrence of weird stuff that happened. I was given the opportunity to help open this brand new location, and since it came with a fat raise and a promotion, I definitely accepted. It now has been about 5 years since the location opened. I don't believe there is a single employee left that was there when we opened of the over 60 employees we hired prior to opening day. On opening day, not long after the ribbon cutting ceremony, a woman delivering flowers dropped the flowers on her sandaled foot and sliced her foot open, bleeding all over the entrance. Within a week of being open, we had water and sewage coming up through all the drains, including sewage ones outside all over the property. It had not been raining. It wasn't like a flood situation weather-wise. We have no idea what caused it to suddenly happen. And just as quickly as it happened, it went away. Plumbers were baffled. A couple of months after we opened, we faced a severe storm that destroyed the high-rise interstate sign and caused a 7-hour power outage. I had sent several people home, but I'd kept a couple of employees in case the power came back. As we sat in the restaurant dining room, chatting under electric lantern light, an employee who was a local resident and had lived in the town all of her life mentioned that people were a little worried when this place was announced to be built because this property had been rumored to have been a Native American burial ground for years. I have zero way to prove or disprove if that is accurate, but given the events getting more serious, as time went on, it makes you wonder. When the power did come back despite several steps, I took unplugging all the equipment to make sure the surge wouldn't fry stuff. We lost several pieces of expensive equipment. Some of this equipment was critical and caused major operational problems for weeks until it could be replaced. The first winter after we opened was the coldest in years. So cold that we had to buy space heaters for the servers in the electrical room so the servers wouldn't freeze. We had issues with frozen pipes, especially in the truck care center and the restaurant. 6 months after opening was the first death. A truck driver came in to take a shower in one of the shower rooms, and we had sensors on the doors that let us know how long someone had been in there. If the timer had been going for a couple of hours, we would knock on the door to see if maybe they had actually left so we could clean it for the next driver. The employee knocked on the door of a shower that had been in use for a couple hours, and there wasn't an answer. She used the key to open the door, and the driver was on the floor. He had died of a stroke. He had been driving a semi-truck 30 minutes before he entered that room. The employee who had opened the door was significantly traumatized. The company did a great job of offering support for her, but she didn't last much longer after that. A few weeks later was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. I was working on the restaurant side of the truck stop as the restaurant manager had quit after a series of bad things that happened to her, and they asked me to move me into the role temporarily. The assistant manager on the store side came over because the freakiest thing had just happened. She pulls me into the store side office and pulls up the cameras to show me what happened. A small 4-door sedan pulls into the lot, but doesn't pull into the gas station side. Pulls into the truck stop side where the semi-trucks pull in. He parks next to the maintenance shed, which is located adjacent to the main building and very close to a large trash compactor. He gets out of the vehicle, opens one of the doors, and pulls out a trash bag. He throws the trash bag on top of the compactor. He then gets in his car and leaves the property. I don't remember exactly how long, as she had fast-forwarded the footage, but I think it was an hour or two later he returned. He pulls back next to the compactor, climbs on top of the compactor, and chucks the bag onto the roof of the maintenance shed. He then climbs down off of the compactor, gets in his car, and leaves, never to return. This is when he was noticed by an employee who had been outside gathering trash to take to the compactor. The maintenance shed is more of a small building garage. It's about 20 x 20. If the employee had not seen him throw it up there, it probably wouldn't have been noticed maybe ever, as the building was as high as a 1-story building. Once the employee saw the individual leave, he goes into the shed, gets a ladder, and goes to get the bag on top of the roof of the shed. He brought the bag inside the store to show the assistant manager. Inside the bag is a ton of paper. These documents list hundreds, thousands of addresses across the United States. Under each address is a specific hidden location on each property where a body could be found. No information on who the individuals were, just sex and location of the individuals on these properties. The locations span from coast to coast, but I didn't get a chance to look too deeply into them. I was really freaked out, and I thought that touching them would maybe contaminate something, so we just put what we had pulled out back in the bag. The obvious answer here was to call the police, so that is what happened next. Now, the thing about truck stops is that they are more often than not in remote locations along interstates for obvious reasons. The town this truck stop is located in has 3 police officers total. It is a town with less than 1,000 people. So, when I say the chief of police showed up, it's because he was the highest ranking officer of 3 in the town. He hated us as truck stops bring crime, and suddenly he had a lot more work to do. He comes in, watches the footage, and looks in the bag. And the most frustrating thing here is that he was not concerned in the slightest. He asked what we wanted him to do about it. It was probably a prank, etc. He took the items with him, filled out a form for a request for the footage, and left. My hope here is that he at least forwarded this to the FBI. A couple of weeks after this, there was a body found of a bound, nude, and recently deceased man across the street at a dump. Because it was a dump, they had no idea where the individual had originated from. Sometime in following weeks was the second death on the property. It was a driver that had died in his truck. Somewhere in the middle of this, we had another severe storm, and the interstate high-rise was destroyed again. We had another weird incident involving abandoned things, but this one had a resolution. A driver came in to show us that someone had left. Ratchet straps and small children clothing folded up neatly next to a diesel pump. The combination of the items was alarming for me, so I got on the camera system and called the police. I was able to find the truck that left the items, and luckily I got the one amazing police officer in the town. This time she actually did her job and followed up with me to let me know that she had found the driver and called him. He had his kid in the truck for a while for summer break, but it had ended, so had brought her home with her mom and wasn't going to see his kid for a while, so when cleaning out his truck, he had this clothing and some straps he didn't need and thought someone else could use the items. He didn't think about the combination of the two raising eyebrows, and he honestly was really grateful that somebody would be worried and follow up in case. A couple months after the first year mark, the state DOT had to shut down the off-on ramp to the interstate exit started to collapse, and they were worried that the overpass would collapse as well. We had nearly zero business for weeks as construction crews rebuilt the ramps and repaired the overpass. It was during this time that I earned a promotion to a general manager role and was moved to a different location. I kept in touch for a while, especially with my former boss and the assistant manager. The incidences continued. A couple months after I left, there were two major incidents, but I cannot remember which came first. One was involving an individual that entered the building with a machete. He was aggressive. The employees were terrified. I wish I hadn't deleted it, but there's footage of state troopers coming in with AKs and drop-kicking the guy. Unsure where this person came from as he walked, and this location was 10 to 15 miles from the nearest town. The second was a customer attacked a teenage cashier because he didn't get the customer's lotto ticket correct and got into a brawl with the maintenance guy who came to the kid's defense. Slowly, over time, I lost touch with them, and they both left the location, so I stopped getting the stories. I don't know if they're continuing. Haunted? Portal to hell? I don't know, but what I do know is now I avoid truck stops like the plague. As the darkness deepens, so do the mysteries, and each beat brings us closer to the unknown. Brace yourself, the next story takes us even deeper into the abyss. Knives. This is written in the style of fiction, but it's 100% true. It happened in 1987 to 1988. The house I was renting was a murder house. Nothing to do with this story, but yes. I rented a murder house for a while. The people in the story are myself, Laika, and my best friend, Joe. Anyway, on with the story. I'd been living in the murder house around 4 months with no issues, apart from me and Joe constantly pranking each other. Me and Joe were still working as station supervisors on the London Underground. Anyways, we were great friends. We both 100% mutually friend-zoned each other from the start, and we both shared a love of pranks. Sure, they got a little out of hand sometimes, but it kept us both on our toes. At 26, Joe was almost 7 years older than me, and the only issue I had was that he would take my stuff sometimes. For instance, if I bought a pizza and put it in the fridge for when I got home from work, I'd come home, open the fridge, and see a note saying, "Laika, I took the pizza. Here's 20 pounds, buy another one." And there would be a pound 20 paperclipped to the note he'd written in the fridge. He did it with everything, mostly when he'd had a few beers. He once drank a quarter bottle of brandy I'd been saving, and I was so mad I'd punched him right in the arm as hard as I could. Joe had just laughed, and he had the kind of laugh that made me laugh too. Both of us never really took anything seriously for more than a minute. Anyway, the next time I bought brandy, I put the bottle in the drawer under my bed so he couldn't get it. I'd gone to bed and was sleeping when suddenly I was woken up by my bed moving. Joe was in my room, a little drunk, and he was as carefully as a big, clumsy drunk could be, opening the drawer to get at my brandy. He saw me open my eyes and started laughing. I'm just here for the brandy. Somehow I managed to restrain myself from breaking the bottle over his big, drunk head. I handed him the bottle with a tired, narky, just F King, take it, and FK off, and he took it from me and stumbled out of my room. The next night, I shut and locked my bedroom door while I slept. I told him never to come in my room and wake me again like that. A couple of nights later, I was woken up by the sound of someone jiggling my door handle. Screw Joe, I thought. The door was locked, so he couldn't get in. I ignored him for a while, hoping he would give up, but the door handle kept squeaking and moving. I very quietly crept out of my bed and put my hand on the lock. I was planning on carefully unsnicking it, then wrenching the door open and throwing myself at an unsuspecting Joe screaming like a banshee. It would be so funny. I silently stifled a giggle. I remained deathly silent. It wouldn't work if he heard me unlock and open the door. I had one hand on the little lock ready to twist it, and the other hand on the handle. I counted in my head 3, 2, 1. And right then I had a little thought that I was tired and didn't want to prank Joe after all. I'd go back to bed and pretend to be asleep, and eventually he would stop fiddling with my door handle, so that's what I did. I got back in my warm bed and went off to sleep. I was woken by Joe some hours later. "Laika," he shouted, knocking on my door. "Come out of your room really carefully and don't freak out. Don't touch anything. I've already called the police." He sounded different to how he usually sounded. I carefully unlocked my door and slowly opened it. I looked outside of my room and noticed that every knife we had in the house was on the floor outside my room, arranged in a semicircle facing my door. We both liked to cook and had 2 sets of deadly sharp chef's knives and a set of steak knives, and yeah, we had a lot of knives. And right now they were all on the landing carpet, pointing directly at my bedroom door. I asked Joe if he heard anything and if it was him trying to get in my room around 1 a.m. He looked at me wide-eyed and told me that he hadn't even been home all night. His shift had finished at 11 p.m. and the night foreman hadn't shown up for his shift, so Joe had volunteered to stay and do a double shift. He'd finished around 6 a.m., arrived home to find a downstairs window had been forced open and lots of things moved around. The police arrived and weren't even that bothered because no one was hurt and nothing had been taken and nothing, apart from the lock on the window, was damaged. But tons of things around the house were moved around, and the way they were moved was like in weird shapes and patterns. I shudder when I think of what would have happened if I would have wrenched the door open thinking it was Joe. The ship I'm employed on has an unusual protocol. I finally discovered the reasoning behind it. Morning sunshine. A gruff voice muttered directly into my ear, followed by a sharp nudge on my shoulder. I turned over and rubbed my eyes, having just awoken from a fairly deep slumber. In particular, one of the deepest slumbers I'd managed in weeks. I checked my watch and promptly released a quiet string of obscenities. "Forgot to set my alarm?" I questioned in abject defeat. The man standing over me was my bunkmate, a salty old fool by the name of Hudson. His long gray beard and worn face were indicative of his countless years at sea, and he was fittingly built like a barrel of whiskey as well. "Aye," he replied, taking a moment to steady his feet. I nearly fell off the edge of the bed, and likewise noticed that half my belongings were now strewn across the room. "Lucky for you, weather's too rough to work on deck. Got the evening off," he added with a chuckle. "Few of the gents are having a card tourney in the mess hall. We'll save you a spot," he added before leaving the room. I slowly stood up and retrieved a shirt from the floor, putting it on while grabbing my phone, which had by then slid fully under my bed. I exited the room, balancing my footing as the ship heavily tilted once more. Several other crew were chatting in the hall, who promptly greeted me as I made my way by. The ship again tilted to one side, that time producing an audible creak that echoed through the halls. Despite the proven seaworthiness of the cargo vessel, along with its immense size, storms still put me on edge to a noticeable degree. It was a fear I hadn't been able to shake even after a full year working on the vessel, something I then attributed to being rather new. Eventually, the echoing of conversation could be heard up ahead. I reached the end of the hall and turned left into the mess hall, where 4 lunchroom-style tables were occupied by fellow shipmates. Everyone was partaking in various activities, from reading to card playing and hounding down leftovers from the previous meal. Hudson was sitting at an occupied table at the end and waved me over. Douglas and Connie were likewise at the table. 2 other individuals I had become acquainted with throughout my employment on the vessel. Multiple of Hudson's cohorts were there as well, but I scarcely even recalled their names most days. "Aye, Sleepy Beauty has arrived," Hudson jokingly commented. I responded with an exaggerated bow to the group and took a seat, receiving an even further exaggerated round of applause in response that drew the attention of a nearby table. Douglas slid me a pre-dealt hand of cards, and the game began. It was a variation of poker, using salvaged bottle caps as chips. A simple game, but one that occupied quite a bit of our free time. Douglas eventually cleaned house on the first hand, as the rest of us exasperatedly tossed our cards on the table for another to be dealt. "Another day, another win," he teasingly boasted. Another hand was dealt, with the same results to our collective dismay. However, the post-game banter was cut short by an announcement over the intercom. "All crew to cabins, all crew to cabins. Lights out in 30. An audibly exhausted voice ordered through the speakers overhead. Everyone complied and began filing back through the hallway to the crew quarters. Our table followed suit, despite me somewhat unsure as to the premature ending of the festivities. Connie, evidently noticing my confusion, offered some clarification. "Making the pass tonight, remember," she added. I checked my phone and quietly cursed under my breath. We were in fact making the pass that night, something the crew simply dubbed Rest Day. The ship was to make its way through a profoundly safe stretch of the Atlantic that night, one with a track record of consistently calm weather and seas, to such an extent that the majority of the crew was provided that time to rest and recoup after many long and brutal days prior. The captain, in fact, made it mandatory to partake in this rest day, and even went to the extent of distributing sleeping medication at the ship infirmary. The reasoning behind it was to ensure everyone was sufficiently recharged for the second half of the trip. Nobody objected, of course, as the captain was well respected, and the crew certainly wasn't going to pass up a guaranteed 10 hours of slumber in what was otherwise a rather sleepless environment. However, the medication was distributed earlier in the day, something I had unfortunately missed after catching up on my rest the entire day prior. "Think the infirmary's still open?" I asked Hudson, already knowing the answer. "Nay, rest day for him too," he replied. We reached our cabin and entered it. Hudson closed the door and collapsed onto his bunk at the opposite side of the room. He reached into his pocket and removed a small bag of pills, likewise retrieving a bottle of sufficiently aged apple juice as it rolled across the floor at his bedside. He dropped the medication into the juice and chugged the whole bottle in a single massive swig. I visibly winced in disgust, having seen that bottle rolling across the floor for likely a week prior, but otherwise didn't comment on it. "See ya on the other side, lad," Hudson remarked with a humorous salute. He got comfortable and retrieved a book from underneath the covers, removing a bookmark and picking up where he had evidently left off. I simply retrieved my phone and laid back, starting up a game of chess against the computer with sleep being well out of the picture. After a couple games, snoring erupted from the opposite side of the room. I glanced over, being greeted by the slightly less than graceful sight of Hudson deep in slumber, having fallen asleep still holding his book. I simply returned my device to the confines of my pocket and released a deep sigh, fully recognizing that I wouldn't be doing the same anytime soon. If anything, I'd somehow begun feeling more awake since lying down, likely the result of me fully waking up from my extended nap earlier in the day. With all other options exhausted and me wanting to do something other than stare at my device for another 9 hours, I elected to go for a smoke break. I wasn't much of a smoker, but had a single pack for the sole reason of killing boredom when all else failed. As evidence of this, it had lasted roughly a month and was still over half full. I retrieved the carton along with a lighter from my locker before quietly exiting the cabin and making my way towards the topside deck. The ship was no longer rocking, even to a slight extent, suggesting that we'd made our way through the rough weather and onto the pass. However, as a result of the captain's orders, most of the internal lights had been either dimmed or extinguished, making navigating the corridors difficult nonetheless. Eventually, I was able to turn to the right down the hall, where I was greeted by the sealed door to the outside. With some effort, I opened the large bulkhead and exited onto the external walkway, a semi-covered area that provided a clear view down the side of the ship, along with the sea extending on the horizon. The fresh smell of rain was ever present, and most exterior surfaces were likewise still soaking wet. I leaned on the railing, retrieved a cigarette from the carton, and lit it as I deeply inhaled. Upon looking upwards, I was greeted by a rather unique sight. The sky was filled with the sizable and puffy clouds typically known to bring heavy storms, but they had a noticeably green-yellow tint, not subtly by any means either, as it reflected off the water in a manner that turned the otherwise clear blue sea into something nearly akin to that of a lake on land. The sun, which was roughly 2 hours away from setting, similarly cast a unique hue across the ship as well, giving everything that sickly green-yellow tint. While this was relatively common on land, as it generally occurred before the arrival of a heavy storm, it generally wasn't spotted that far out at sea. I continued to take in this strange sight, listening to the calm wake as it splashed against the sides of the vessel, before the sound of footsteps around the corner caught my attention. Soon, a rather scrawny individual by the name of Carlo rounded the corner, a cigarette likewise in his hand. He was one of the cooks on board and was a notably reserved individual. He wasn't rude by any measure, but always seemed visibly beat down from the job, so I typically limited our interactions to simple greetings. He glanced at me and nodded, with me doing the same. However, he subsequently looked in my direction once more, before offering a somewhat less than polite greeting. "The fuck are you doing up?" he questioned in an audibly concerned tone, somewhat off-put by this. I took a moment to gather my words before responding. "Was crashed all day and missed the memo. Couldn't sleep, so here I am," I responded, gesturing to the still lit cigarette in my hand. He cursed under his breath before waving me over. "Follow me," he ordered in an audibly exasperated tone, walking back the way he came. I waited a moment, then eventually followed him around the corner and back into the ship. His pace was notably quick, and for a moment I nearly struggled to keep up with him as he turned up a flight of stairs. "So what exactly am I missing here?" I implored, struggling to keep pace. He shook his head and continued up the stairs. "Cap will explain far better than I can," he blandly replied. After making our way up another set of stairs, we reached a carpeted common area with multiple doors on either side of the wall, along with one at the center of the room straight ahead. Carlo opened it and motioned for me to follow as he stepped through. I followed and immediately noticed that it was the bridge of the ship, something a deckhand such as myself generally had no reason to venture into. The captain, a surly individual with a face covered in stubble and noticeable bags under his eyes, sat in a chair towards the front of the room, fixated out the window. The color projected from the clouds likewise made its way through the many windows of the bridge, giving everything in the dimly lit room a comparably sickly hue as that outside. He turned, seeming visibly surprised at my presence, before shaking his head and looking downwards for a moment. Without any introduction or explanation, he looked at me once more before making a vague, yet immensely concerning statement. "Well, son, you're about to see some rightly unexplainable shit," he remarked. He checked one of the nearby navigational screens before returning his attention to me. "Got roughly another few miles before we're fully in the pass. Suppose you deserve something of an explanation for..." Then he added, motioning to a nearby chair, I took a seat and awaited his next sentence with bated breath. This here is something many generations of sailors have come to know as morning pass. Not as in the beginning of the day, mind you, but rather the act partaken in after losing a loved one, friend, what have you. He explained before pausing. While this stretch is indeed safe for a vessel of this caliber, many A ships weren't as fortunate in the earlier days of seafaring. He added, fixating out the window once more. In fact, this particular stretch claimed a notable amount of souls in particular, and as a result, it's rather... He appeared to collect his thoughts for a moment before continuing. Haunted, I suppose that's the word for it. He concluded. He once more glanced at the navigational screen before continuing with slightly more urgency than before. The reason we have you lot sleep through this part isn't to make sure everyone's rested. That's complete buffoonery. It's because this area has a certain and unnatural way of messing with the psyche of those who witness it. Something you'll unfortunately be experiencing right quick. He further explained, tapping his head before likewise tapping my shoulder as well. Before I could implore any further, a shadow was suddenly cast in the room. Then another, and then another. Due to the relatively low clearance of the windows, the source wasn't immediately visible from the bridge, but by the time I stood up, at least a dozen or more disrupted the already unnatural light passing through the windows. Neither other individuals in the bridge said a word, and simply directed their attention towards the windows. Noticing a door that presumably led to an exterior walkway to my left, I made my way over and swung it open, stepping out into the salty air. I looked up and immediately noticed multiple small, dark masses, nearly in the hundreds, dotting the sky above us. They weren't birds, as they were unmoving, and had a shape that didn't resemble anything even remotely similar. As I squinted and tried to identify them against the sickly green backdrop of clouds, I felt a slight tap on my shoulder. Carlo was standing there and extended a pair of binoculars in his hand toward me. I retrieved them without a second's hesitation and adjusted their focus toward the strange objects above. It was then that I came to a particularly horrifying conclusion. They certainly weren't birds, or anything expected for that matter. They were people, hundreds upon hundreds of featureless silhouettes, suspended motionless in the sky. I took it in for an extended moment, before lowering the binoculars and adjusting the focus once more. Clearly, I thought, clearly those aren't fucking people. However, by the time I once more raised the binoculars, I confirmed that they were indeed alarmingly human silhouettes, with even more than previously now dotting the sky. I silently handed the binoculars back to Carlo and returned inside the bridge, returning to my seat beside the captain. He extended his hand toward me in a seeming attempt at a reassuring gesture, which I reciprocated. "Name's Lachlan, by the way. What's yours, son?" he questioned. "Adrian," I quietly replied. He nodded in return before pointing to the cigarette I'd entirely forgotten that was still in my grip. "Well, Adrian, care for a smoke?" he politely asked. I obliged and handed him one from the carton in my pocket. The three of us stood and made our way to the door, with me hesitating at the threshold for a brief moment. Lachlan, already being outside, gestured upwards before commenting. "They're a bit spooky is all. They'll stay up there for now, no worries," he affirmed with a slight chuckle. I ultimately joined them, and we passed around the lighter, igniting our smokes as we stared at the unearthly scene above us. Lachlan, having finished his quite quickly, dropped it at his feet and stepped on it, with the small filter making an audible sizzle as it hit the rain-soaked deck. With lack of any further questions, Lachlan continued his explanation. "Those that traverse the area suggest that those are the many souls whose lives were extinguished along this very stretch, lost, simply searching for a rescue, some respite, that will unfortunately never come," he continued. "I presume that on the scarce chance the living pass through this area, that's what they expect us to be," he finally concluded. I didn't say a single word and finished my cigarette in complete silence. Briefly thereafter, however, that silence was broken, at first with a slight, nearly inaudible hum. It gradually increased in volume until within 5 minutes, the noise had ascended to a chorus that filled the air. For lack of a more fitting description, it resembled a choir holding a singular note, unbreaking, and perfectly. It possessed a nearly flawless and unwavering pitch, but a discerning ear could very faintly draw individuality from the evident mass of voices. What discerned it from a choir, however, was the completely unnatural nature of it. There wasn't anything that could even be remotely producing that sound, whether natural or not, in the middle of the ocean. Furthermore, not even the most well-trained human vocalist could hope to produce a noise that rang with such an indescribable sorrow and hollow beauty. For a short while, all three of us stood in silence, listening to the chorus of lost souls. Whether out of fear or admiration would likely vary between each of us, but we spoke nary a word nonetheless. Eventually, it began increasing in pitch, first slowly and then at a quickening rate. Carlo released a heavy sigh and proceeded to make his way back into the bridge. "Well, that's our cue," Lachlan declared in an exasperated tone, pointing towards the doorway. I obliged and returned to the bridge, with Lachlan following and taking an extra moment to ensure that the door was latched properly. "What happens now?" I hesitantly asked. Carlo scratched his head and appeared to consider his answer before responding. "Well, can't really sugarcoat this. It's gonna get pretty damn scary in a few," he replied before exiting the bridge. Lachlan reviewed multiple screens on board the ship before addressing me without drawing his gaze from the displays. "Since you're here, go lend Carlo a hand, yeah?" he asked, pointing back towards the door. I simply nodded and rushed out of the room, catching up to Carlo at the stairs. He hardly acknowledged my presence and was visibly moving with a sense of urgency. "What exactly do I need to be doing?" I questioned, attempting to keep up. Carlo glanced behind him for a moment before continuing down the stairs. "Got to verify that the outside hatches are sealed. I'll check port. You work on starboard," he responded as he reached the bottom of the stairs and turned down the corridor. While I was still very much processing everything I had witnessed in such a short window, I went the opposite direction and began checking the hatches as ordered. Every bulkhead I came across was already sealed, making my job rather easy. Halfway through, however, the ship began to lean and creak as it did before. It began rather slowly, but soon escalated to such an extent that traversing the corridors became a clear challenge. Eventually, I made it to the door I had exited from during my initial smoke break. To my dismay, it was still open, with an overpowering gust of wind practically making me lose my balance on approach. I briefly peered through the doorway, immediately taking notice of the quickly darkening skies along with increasingly turbulent seas. I grabbed the handle of the bulkhead and attempted to pull it back to little avail. Once more, I attempted to close it and made some form of progress before the wind again launched the door back open. This time it took me with it as I lost my footing and slammed onto the exterior deck. The sea had continued to worsen, and to make matters worse, a heavy downpour had begun as well. I cautiously returned to my feet, immediately noticing Carlo at the doorway, steadying himself on the frame as he offered a hand. I took it, and he pulled me back inside as we collectively managed to pull the door shut and seal it with some effort. Without missing a beat, he slapped my shoulder and nodded down the corridor as he took off. "This way, head to the control room," he called behind him. I followed, with the turbulence of the waves now slamming me against the walls of the corridor. Still, I kept pace as we made our way through the dimly lit halls of the vessel. We eventually turned a corner, with a stairwell being immediately visible on our right. Carlo made his way down, and I was about to follow before I paused. Someone was screaming, not inside the ship, but rather outside, considering its dull and muted nature. It was seemingly originating from a nearby bulkhead, which I barely made my way to without wiping out multiple times. I placed my ear on the cold steel of the door and could very clearly make out faint banging on the outside, followed by panicked wailing. Even considering the many unexplainable things I had witnessed, I hesitantly gripped the lever of the door, believing that somehow, some way, a crewmate had gone unaccounted for and was locked outside. Right as I was preparing to open it, however, Carlo appeared behind me and abruptly grabbed me, pulling me back toward the stairwell. As I was about to object, the banging on the outside of the door grew in volume to a deafening series of crashes that echoed through the corridor. The wailing surged as well, becoming profoundly audible through the thick steel bulkhead. At that point, it no longer sounded human, or rather living. having an unnatural and shrill echo that separated it from something to be expected from a human. Similarly, it began being heard from other parts of the ship. More specifically, every external door or hatch on the ship began producing a similar series of noises. They merged into one, producing a deafening symphony of desperation and crashing. I attempted to cover my ears as we descended into the belly of the ship, with the sounds above eventually fading to a tolerable extent. We entered the engine room, passing the various roaring machines as we made our way into the connected control room. The noise level from the vessel's engines could still be heard through the thick walls, but greatly assisted in blocking the unpleasant crashing from above. Both of us collapsed against the furthest wall as we caught our breath. For another 3 hours, the ship continued to tilt and sway, and we continued to sit in that room without speaking a word. Eventually, the storm subsided as the vessel gradually began to level out. Carlo checked his watch and stood up, with me doing the same. We returned up the stairs, through the corridors, and back up the stairs leading to the bridge. The door to the bridge was still open, and we made our way in. Lachlan was slumped in his chair, blankly staring at the furthest wall, having endured that entire ordeal from what was fundamentally the front seat. He weakly waved our way as a greeting before releasing an extended sigh and straightening his posture. "Well, Adrian, how'd you enjoy the morning pass?" he sarcastically asked, seeming to force an attempt at a smile. I shook my head while attempting to formulate even the most remotely coherent thing to say. "Just give me the fucking pills next time," I quietly muttered. In response, he raised his index finger and shook his fingers side to side in a clear symbol of denial. "Hate to break it to you, son, but that's not exactly an option. You can't. They simply won't let you," he replied, dropping his hand to his side. "I'll save you the explanation. You've already processed enough in such a short time. Go and get some rest now. Wake-up calls in a few hours," he added, offering a sympathetic smile. With no remaining energy to implore further, I simply turned around and silently exited the bridge. Before I could make it to the stairs, however, he called from behind me yet again. "And Adrian, maybe keep all this to yourself? Best to keep this between the initiated, yeah?" he added with a weak chuckle. I nodded and made my way down the stairs, down the corridor, and back into my bunk. I managed to secure a few hours of rest before I was shaken awake. I groaned and sat up, rubbing my eyes to see Hudson at my bedside. "Almost slept in again, sunshine," he jokingly remarked. He leaned in and took a closer look, with his cheerful expression slowly morphing into visible concern. "Golly, you like shit. Didn't sleep well?" he questioned. I considered sharing everything that had occurred over that night with him, but quickly dismissed the idea. "Yeah, that about sums it up," I weakly replied. He shrugged and began preparing for the shift ahead. I followed suit, threw my uniform on, and went to perform my duties as I did every other day. As for the words of the captain, he wasn't wrong in the slightest. As much as I tried to forget that night, my sleep was invaded by those floating figures. Many nights after I awoke in a cold sweat, my dreams being permeated by the desperate cries of those lost souls that called to me on that stretch. Each day, after they worsened and worsened, costing hours upon hours of rest, they only subsided, albeit temporarily, upon making that stretch once more. The morning pass was traversed roughly once or more each month on that vessel, and from that point forward, I was awake every single time. 5 years later, I have endured the morning pass exactly 72 times. It never gets easier, but the months with multiple passes through the area were generally the most bearable. Whether this is a cautionary tale or a coping mechanism, I'm personally not quite sure. Regardless, I'll be ending this here for now. In roughly an hour, I'll be making pass 73, with plenty more to come. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the shadows. If you enjoyed these creepy tales, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story. Sleep tight, and remember, sometimes the scariest things are the ones you can't see. Until next time, stay spooky.